Hello, welcome to Adobe Live. This is World Interaction Day. World Interaction Design Day. Great way to start. We're closing out this 24-hour live stream with an interview with Margot Bloomstein, Principal Content Strategist at Appropriate Inc. My name is Sarah Smart. I am a Senior UX Content Strategist here at Adobe. If you're just joining us, here's what we've covered so far. We started with a talk on designing in XD with Lindsay and Coy. We then proceeded to an interview with Josh Silverman. But before that, we apparently had live design. Sorry, this wasn't in my notes. After Josh Silverman, then we interviewed Julian Crespo. And then you perhaps participated in an XD Daily Creative Challenge with Andrea. Now we are at this interview with Margot, but after us, stay tuned for live design with Daniela and Cameron. But for now, I'm here with Margot Bloomstein to talk about using content and design to build trust. Margot is kind of a big deal in my field, content strategy. So I'm going to try to avoid fangirling and let her tell us who she is, what she does. So where are you from?
Sure. And we can equally fangirl from, I think, like we've seen each other on the karaoke stage. So, and we all know what kind of response that gets, good or bad. So I'm here from Boston, really excited to be joining Adobe today and celebrating Interaction Design Day all around the world. I guess it is International Interaction Design Day, given that folks are chiming in from all over, participating from all over. So really excited to be a part of that. And I'm really excited that I think by virtue of participation in the work that we do, but then also with the different voices that different regions and cities have cultivated to put on different stages and in different meetups today, I'm here to say that, yeah, content strategy is a part of interaction design. Another leg on that sort of three-legged stool, I guess you could say, of user experience design, also comprising design, more formal design, and information architecture. So excited to be here kind of talking about things from that perspective as well.
Cool. Here's a question I get a lot, so I'm sure you have a great answer to it. How did you get to where you are in your career today?
Oh, sure. So my background is actually in design. I have my BFA in communication design, and that was in a program that was maybe more oriented toward pure graphic design, typography, color and communication, a lot more kind of two-dimensional work that predated what we think of as modern web design, I guess. And then I graduated school sort of during like the rise of the dot-com boom and then bust. And I decided to focus more on content strategy because for me it seemed like an opportunity to get a seat at the table earlier, at least in talking with clients about their communication goals, why they wanted a website anyhow. And at that time it was pretty much just websites that we were talking about and brochureware and all. And also to learn more about their users. So if we didn't have a user researcher on the team, it gave me the opportunity to be digging into those questions earlier. And then I joined a content strategy team at Sapient that largely took a chance on me, really mentored me, and was incredibly patient with the 22-year-old me, who certainly needed a lot of patience. And
we all do at 22.
Yeah. Some of us also at 32 and beyond. And it was a wonderful opportunity to dig in deep with a lot of brands, to really understand those things that helped make them unique and to figure out what those qualities were and how we could surface them then through content types and editorial style and tone and the frequency of communication and then also like the density of language and content on the page and partner with the graphic design team and information architecture team to do that. And then from Sapient, I joined a series of mid-sized agencies to help them grow their content strategy teams. And that was like at a time where our clients weren't necessarily always using the term content strategy, didn't really know what it was, but they were raising problems that could be addressed through content strategy. And then I went out on my own in in 2010, incorporated, and that was when I decided to really kind of double down my focus on content strategy, specifically around brand-driven communication, to see where we could kind of drag the pendulum back a little bit. I think over the past 20 years, we've certainly seen how early on, maybe there was a focus too much on what different brands wanted to communicate. And of course, if you know your company, you know your needs best and all, maybe you know or you think you know your users' needs best as well. And then bit by bit, we realized, well, no, this ought to be more of a user-centered design process. And folks started kind of dragging the pendulum back that way to say, let's see first, let's do that research and figure out what our users need. Not just what they say they need, but let's also look at what goes on in kind of opportunistic engagement with design, and see how people are interacting with the world and the baggage that they bring to the experiences that we create. I think that there's an opportunity, and there's been kind of a growing opportunity over the past several years, to say, all right, now let's bring the pendulum back more to the middle, because if all brands within an industry that have the same basic target audience, if they were all to communicate the same way and focus on offering their users maybe the same content to support their goals and experiences, the web would be a very boring place, but also there would be no differentiation between organizations. And I mean, when you're booking a flight, say coast to coast, and you say, well, I can choose between Southwest and maybe JetBlue, and I've got a couple other options, there's very different experiences and very different price points there too, and also different amenities. And it's the differentiation between brands that know themselves that really helps our users differentiate between us as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that ladders into the 3 V's in the book you're working on?
Oh, okay. We're
Voice.
jumping there. Yes, yeah. So
sorry, it made me think of voice, and I was like, ooh, that's one of them.
Yeah.
By the way, Margot is working on a book about using content and design to build trust. So I want to know kind of how do those 3 V's play into that brand differentiation?
Sure. Yeah.
And how, like, why this is an important topic for you.
Yeah. So I guess kind of just pedaling back a little bit there, in my focus on brand-driven communication over the past several years, I've looked at kind of different aspects of content strategy, and we say that it's a broad umbrella, and there are many different areas of practice within it. There are some people that focus more on brand-driven communication, maybe some people more on metadata-driven content strategy, or the role of a CMS and how to implement and tailor that to best fit your needs, or content modeling. And I found that in my work as I'm working with brands, one of the undercurrents that I've been seeing over the past couple of years is that a lot of their efforts in content and design, and maybe more broadly in marketing, are falling flat because, frankly, their users don't trust them anymore. They've started to see how there are maybe gaps in communication or inconsistencies in the look and feel of a brand, or maybe how it translates across different platforms. And those inconsistencies can really be damning. And in the kind of modern era where we are wrestling with this insidious, creeping cynicism toward many of the brands that we used to trust, many of the government services, consumer brands, platforms of communication and media that we used to trust, that used to be so familiar, now people kind of bring kind of a raised eyebrow to it, saying like, well, can I really trust what you're telling me? Maybe even if it's information on services that will be in my own best interest. I don't know, because you've changed your message. You've changed your look and feel over time. You're making promises now that I know run counter to the old qualities that your brand used to espouse. And those problems have really driven my focus over the past couple of years then on what brands can do to rebuild trust. You mentioned the 3 V's. As I've been interviewing creative directors and marketers and writers, kind of folks all across the spectrum, to hear what works and what doesn't, what's more of the same, The areas that I've been focusing on seem to fall into three buckets. One is around how you create and maintain a consistent voice, and I mean that both visually and verbally. So how you create and maintain a consistent look and feel that's authentic to your brand, and we can unpack what authenticity even means, because I think a lot of us don't really know anymore. But voice, then also volume, in terms of the level of detail that you want to offer. And again, visually and verbally. For some brands, it makes sense to offer long pages of long form copy because for their audience, they love to research, they love to read. And in doing that research, they kind of arm themselves in more data and then can feel more confident. On the visual side of things, I think the corollary we see are when people can look through really detailed imagery, maybe of how a product works, or look through like detailed specs and technical drawings of the thing that they're interested in backing on Kickstarter, and they gain confidence that way. In other cases, though, it makes sense for brands to use shorter sentences, minimize jargon, keep things clean and simple, and have really uncluttered imagery, uncluttered, unfussy typefaces. You won't see any serifs there, that type of thing. So I look at voice, the volume of detail, and then finally, the role of vulnerability. And I mean that from the perspective of how brands can really operationalize vulnerability and what that means. Because I think that we've been talking a lot over the past few years about interpersonal vulnerability and how vulnerability can be a strength sometimes when we're willing to open ourselves up and kind of establish rapport in a relationship. And I'm curious about what that means then for organizations and brands, because I think we've seen a really interesting shift over the past 20 years or so. I mean, you think about like back in the 80s, every organization, every brand tried to seem bigger than they were. It was like the era of everybody wearing shoulder pads, and it was like even our brands wore shoulder pads. And no small business wanted to really seem small or look small. And now there's been a really interesting shift where brands see the value of becoming more human scale, of speaking more in the first person and kind of what that means. I think I'm looking in the wrong camera here. But speaking more in the first person and then also showing imagery that is maybe less polished, kind of less highly produced, to show maybe through Instagram or other more immediate platforms what it looks like behind the scenes and why you should trust the end product, because we're going to show you how the sausage has been made. And there's a lot of value in that too. And I think we can see the impact of voice, volume, and vulnerability in content and in design, and more broadly in marketing and brand development. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for change there. So when we confront this increasing problem around trust and cynicism, brands need to realize that by addressing those things, by addressing voice, volume, and vulnerability, they have a real opportunity to foster trust again. Because by doing those things, they empower their customers. By empowering people, we rebuild their confidence in their own knowledge and in the brands around them. And by empowering people, we can regain their trust.
That last point about vulnerability is fascinating. I know we are both active on Twitter, and I would love your take on authenticity and how it relates to what accounts like Denny's, Steakum, Moon Pie, and so forth are doing. Oh. Is that like leaning too far? Is this something you're going to explore more in your book?
That's interesting. I have to admit, despite where I hung out when I was in high school, I don't follow Denny's on Twitter, and I feel like that's a huge miss.
It is wild there.
Yeah. Oh, it was back in the 90s too. So I think when brands have that opportunity to maybe pull down the facade, pull down that carefully curated, polished face that they normally offer the world and say, this is who we really are, that can be good as long as who they really are is the best version of themselves. Because sometimes we realize...
Not just like a depressed intern.
Yeah, like... That's not, depressed, underpaid intern is not a good look. But I think when it's an opportunity to say, here's who we are behind the scenes, and you're going to like us even more, that can be polarizing. And I don't know that that's a bad thing, because I think it gives people that are more inclined to like the brand reason to double down and say, wow, you really do align with my values. And I don't know that any of those brands are making big social statements, but certainly for others that, like I think of like a Patagonia, that's always a classic example of a brand that really wears its values on its sleeve to say, no, this is who we are, and we do believe that global warming and climate change are real, and we do believe that we should be investing in that, and that people that oppose it, whether they're in government and policymakers or other corporations, we're not going to do business with them. We're not going to give them a platform and just kind of step in line there. I think when brands do that, they pull off the traditional marketing facade and reveal who they really are, and people that like who they are will become even more ardent supporters. That's when people transform from customer to advocate. And people that don't like that, maybe you liked their money, but do you really want them as customers in the long term anyhow?
Nice. I'm a little curious about why this sort of issue of trust and responsibility is so important to you personally. I remember the first time I saw you speak, you were talking about, I think it was like fake news was kind of the hook there back in 2016, 2017. Yeah. And so this kind of like idea of brand responsibility seems to be a common thread that you've cared about a lot. And I'm just wondering like why it's so important that you're writing a book about it. Tell me more.
I guess I think about the impact of our work a lot, and that old idea that if something's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And if we're going to contribute our time and talent and creativity to organizations, and I do believe, like, if you're a designer, if you're a writer, if you work in an agency or in a big Fortune 500 corporation or somewhere in between, or if you're a freelancer, you own your time and creativity and talent. You own and need to take responsibility for the outcomes of your work. So invest those things well. And I think that the issue of trust is something that unless we consider it when we're doing our work becomes pointless. It falls flat, because if our target audiences that we so carefully research and that we learn to care about by learning about them, we talk about empathy a lot. Well, if we truly empathize with our audiences, and if we truly empathize with our customers and our clients as well, we need to make sure that the communication that we establish between them is effective. I guess the other point there is if the viewer doesn't get it, you failed to communicate. Well, if people can't buy into the marketing messages that we're delivering them and the new white papers and whatnot that say, here's what you should know about the company, here's what you should know about the new product rollout, if people won't believe that, then what's the point of doing it? And that becomes an environmental concern. Why are we wasting the time, wasting the budget, wasting the resources? Yeah, wasting the resources on all of that.
What are some other ways, aside from, really communicating well, having that empathy, that you can design for trust?
So I think when I look at kind of taking apart the different components of design, as I said, kind of looking at it from the voice side and how brands can be more consistent, we can look at how we can be more cohesive across platforms. I remember kind of learning early on that if people look at like an object that you've designed, like let's say a chair, if they look at it and they're like, it's cool, but I don't know how to sit in it, doesn't really have a lot of value. So we need to give them hooks and affordances that teach people how to interact with that thing that we've designed. I think that goes back to like Raymond Loewy's most advanced yet acceptable. Are we making things that are advanced and too far down that path, or are they still able to push the envelope, able to educate people about the product, but in a way that is still acceptable to them? And I think going down that kind of path of creating experiences that are still acceptable means not changing things up too much version to version, but establishing like a continuity in look and feel. Maybe that means that crossing platforms we maintain like the same brand guidelines and the same typeface and color scheme, but we're able to kind of tune up certain more secondary colors when we go into other platforms. Or maybe the app pulls out different qualities that the website doesn't, or have always been in the background, but in a way that things can still feel familiar to people. I think that kind of approach, of course, reflects our style guidelines and when we're telling people, stick with the manual, don't go rogue and whatnot. But I think it also has to go back to the culture in the organization and how we design that. And I think this is something that that Josh Silverman touched on probably earlier today around the culture of design and design ops. And when we make sure that our organizations are not so siloed that we're not talking about how the different platforms fit together, how the different experiences in which our users engage will fit together, but when we break down those silos or establish methods for communicating among them, then we create a better experience for our end users as well. And I think about like brands like America's Test Kitchen, and I've been doing a lot of research with them because you might think of them as a brand like if you're a home chef, if you really enjoy cooking or baking or something like that. Maybe you've flipped through Cooks Illustrated, their kind of flagship publication. And you might think of them in that realm. I think of them as a publisher, as a media empire, because there's Cooks Illustrated, there's Cooks Country, there's I don't know how many dozens of cookbooks they've created. There's America's Test Kitchen, the television series. They've also got an online cooking school. They've got cooking books for children as well as cooking classes for children. Then there's the Twitter feed, the Instagram feed, et cetera, and it just keeps going, which is a maintenance nightmare if you're one of those people that's helping to keep it going in many organizations. I think for them, they've figured out really how to make it work across platforms in terms of the different uses and different applications of those different platforms. So you can get really good long-form content from them if you're flipping, like, say, through the magazine. But if you're scrolling through a recipe, like, say, on Instagram or something, you don't need to know the backstory of how flour is milled or how to compare, like, the 3 different types of flour, cake flour, all-purpose flour, and bread flour. I only know that not because I'm a chef, but because my daughter has one of their little cooking cookbooks for kids, and I've read that aloud many a time.
My spouse bakes sourdough, so I'm also tangentially interested in the types of flour, but perhaps our audience is not.
Who knew? I did not, but I want to share that with you because you can get that kind of information from some content types, but it doesn't clutter up like any of their recipes. Instead, if you're standing in your kitchen and you're just flipping through the closest device and saying, how do I make this recipe? You can get all the steps right there in the captions under every image. They've streamlined things. Or if you just want to see like the backstory of how they were testing out milling different types of flour, you can catch that just on their Twitter feed as well. And they play with kind of what's the right level of production for each of those different platforms, which goes back to then how do you figure out that right level of detail and maintain a consistent, cohesive voice across all of it?
Mm-hmm. Would you agree that it seems like consumers are kind of having declining trust in organizations overall? And why do you think that would be the case?
That's a good question. Yes, I think that we can see that across all sectors. And I think over the past 10 years or so, there have been 2 interesting problems that have been affecting our work. The first is that there's been a shift in where we get information. So it used to be that we had our sort of trusted sources of expertise, like Walter Cronkite delivered the news, then Dan Rather, Peter Jennings delivered the news, and that's the way it was. And they had many things in common, too. And we've kind of diversified our sources of expertise in many good ways. But we've shifted from looking to those kind of beacons of guidance to then saying, well, let me just hear from people just like me. And sort of this turn to homophily instead to say, I don't want to see like where a restaurant critic recommends I grab dinner. Let me check on Yelp. Let me hear from people that have similar values or want similar attributes in a restaurant. And I'm going to look to TripAdvisor for what hotel I should stay at, or hotels.com. I'm going to be reading reviews and kind of hearing from people like that. And then Facebook kind of pops into that kind of framework as well, in that maybe I'm not getting my news just from a single newspaper or multiple newspapers anymore. Instead, I'm checking Facebook and Twitter first to see what's breaking and what my friends are retweeting and what the trending topics are. And that's how I'm getting my news, or at least learning about what's important to people within my circle, just like me. And then over the past few years, especially in the last election cycle, the last presidential election cycle, we noticed our filter bubbles and we started to realize that they were becoming shaky. We started to kind of pop those filter bubbles, I guess, because we realized some of those people weren't just like us. Sometimes they were bots. Sometimes they were paid listings from people that worked at those hotels. And that's a bit of a challenge to come to that understanding of reality, to acknowledge it, and then change your behavior. But I think that kind of behavioral shift is what a lot of people have done to various degrees of success. So we've moved from expertise to homophily now to this sort of sense of narcissism of saying, well, I can't trust everybody out there in the world. I don't know what kind of lies or fake news that they're feeding me. Instead, I'm going to just trust myself, go with my gut, see if what feels right, maybe I'll think that is right. Sometimes that plays out well. Sometimes it's very, very dangerous. Sometimes that kind of thinking causes us to really question traditional sources of expertise and points of consensus, like within the scientific community around things like climate change and vaccine safety and that sort of thing. And we see the effect that has on global health and then funding and policy making, and how that really changes life for so many more people. So we've got that going on, that shift from expertise to homophily to sort of a sense of narcissism. At the same time, we've learned more and more about gaslighting by politicians and in the media, to see politicians on both sides of the aisle maybe playing fast and loose with the truth. And then we've seen how the media, many large media outlets, have kind of stepped back from the traditional role of journalism of holding politicians to task and also real-time fact-checking and probing deeper on questions and all. And I think that's caused people to lose faith in those organizations. Alongside those issues, we've seen large brands also take a similar kind of approach with maybe changing the qualities for which they've always been known, maybe some bad press that was always associated with that brand, and saying, we're not like that anymore. You can trust us for being really environmentally friendly or really socially conscious, when maybe people that are longtime listeners, longtime fans know better. The problem,
real Wells Fargo.
Yeah. Not to name names or anything. But I think the real problem with that is that in the last election cycle, when we caught politicians lying, and like I said, it was on both sides of the aisle, but I'll throw out Trump, when we've caught him lying. By and large, people that are supporters, people that were supporters before the election, they didn't change their vote. People that liked him still liked him. And that's interesting. That's what drives a lot of my research, because it used to be when we caught politicians flip-flopping, that would scuttle a campaign. Mm-hmm. This time around, it didn't. And I think what we're starting to see as far as the impact of that kind of gaslighting is that it may not change our short-term decisions, but it does start to erode our overall sense of confidence in both our own ability to evaluate information and our confidence in the institutions around us. And because people suffer that lack of confidence, it contributes to that growing sense of cynicism, and that affects all brands then. So if you thought this wasn't your problem, it's our problem now.
Can you touch on that, or go deeper a little bit into that idea of why we need trust and responsibility, why it's important?
Sure.
With other people in design, with even in our teams as we work.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I guess that's getting to the theme of today and all, and hopefully largely the theme of a lot of our work. You're talking about interpersonal trust, and I think that that's necessary for us to be able to do good work and to feel good about the work we do. And the reason why that's not just kind of a soft and fluffy issue is because it's also an issue of budget and line items. When we lack trust, it is expensive and it costs money, because when we're not happy working with people, when we feel like our work is undercut, or when projects get pulled, maybe when you're working on a campaign or a series of blog posts, and then you realize, we just stopped updating that blog after 6 months, because that never happens on the internet. But when that happens, it does over time add up, and it erodes our sense of trust in the quality of our own work and the faith that we have in our employers, that they trust us as well. That's when people's job satisfaction goes down, and that's when they start looking around. And if you've ever worked in HR or in recruiting, or if you have friends that do, it's more expensive to recruit a new person and bring them on board than it is to care about and maintain your existing team and your existing well-oiled machine. So that's why it needs to matter to the bottom line of so many businesses, what's going on in their companies. And then more broadly, as we were saying, when you don't have trust and communication between teams, it's noticeable to your end users. It's noticeable to the people that are saying, like, well, wait, I saw, an offer on the website, but it looks like when I go into store, they don't know anything about it in the brick and mortar store. Or I want to make a return for something that I bought online. I can't bring it into the store. Or how come your catalog looks nothing like or sounds nothing like your in-store experience? Mm-hmm. There are some brands that do that so well. The tone that, say, JetBlue has on their website, in their app, in all of their print collateral, and then on board in the rapport and kind of fun dialogue that you get with many of their flight attendants and staff and gate agents. It's very consistent. That reflects not just their style guide, but also that sense of trust and investment in infrastructure, investment in employees and staff.
So as content strategists, designers, members of these teams, how do you champion trust in your day-to-day actions?
I think a lot of trust has to go back to the tactics that we have to build it. So as opposed to just taking things on faith. I think we've all interacted with people and brands that say, trust me, just trust me, it'll be fine. And that works about as well as when someone says, calm down, you have nothing to worry about, other such wonderful words and phrases that serve us so well in interpersonal communication. But I think that when we look at how we establish trust, so much of it goes back to proof points and education. A lot of the work that I've been doing and what I write about in this book focuses on how we can empower people. Empowering people through education teaches them to not take things on faith, but that it's okay to build kind of a healthy skepticism. And I differentiate between skepticism and cynicism, because I think skepticism says, all right, that sounds good. Let me do my own research and make sure it's up to par and all. Cynicism is the thinking, though, that says, well, everybody's out to get you. That's how they get you. You can't trust anybody, so I'm going to wall myself off. That's when I go back to that state of sort of intellectual narcissism of saying, I can't trust anyone out there. I can't trust what any marketers are telling me. I can't trust what the government is publishing, maybe about tax issues or when I have to fill out certain forms and paperwork, the things that will help me. I can't trust that. I just have to wall myself off if I'm cynical. But if we cultivate a sense of healthy skepticism that says, all right, do your own research. That's okay. When brands say, do your own research, we're going to give you the time and space to do that. That's how we empower our users. That's how we tell our users, we want you to be smarter, because then you'll be a more informed customer. And if you believe in your product, you can give them that time and space to do their own research and then come back to you when they're ready. And I see how brands like Crutchfield do that really well. America's Test Kitchen does that really well. And a lot of government services are starting to do that better and better. And that's really exciting. To look at an example like Crutchfield, the electronics retailer, their audience is one that loves to do a lot of research. They like to gird themselves with information. So they're not just going in and saying, give me the speaker that's going to be right for me, or to pop into my vehicle, or what kind of camera do I need? Just give me whatever the hottest new model is. Instead, they're saying, well, these are my needs. I've already done this little bit of research. I know the kind of pictures that I like to take. It's a lot of sports photography, so I need a really fast lens. But also I'm shooting stuff maybe at my kids' evening baseball game, so I need something that's going to work in low light too. These are my needs. I know myself through a consultative conversation with one of their sales associates. They can get to know your needs better. But as a brand, they're also willing to say, okay, you educate yourself more too before you're ready to come talk to us. So we're going to give you long pages of long form copy. We're going to give you images so that you can compare the effects of different lenses looking at the same subject matter. We're going to give you diagrams that show how the inner parts compare. If one is built with plastic fittings and one has metal, how do they stack up? They're willing to make that investment in their customer, which is really a sign of respect. That they respect that their customers are smart, willing to put in the time, and want to put in the time. And they empower them with that information so that in going through that process, their customers are gaining confidence in their own knowledge. And when people are more confident, they can be more confident in the purchases they make, in the voting decisions that they make, and in all of the 1,000,001 little choices that we make throughout the day. It's a great thing when you can do that and when you can make those choices with a degree of confidence. It's really tough in a cynical society to make those choices and feel good about them if you're constantly second-guessing yourself.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that ties into mutual interest. The first time I ever saw Margot speak was at the Content Strategy Conference called Confab in 2016, 2017. Don't remember which one of those, but one of those. But it's also where I learned that you were a karaoke powerhouse. I'm sure before we go to audience questions that everyone would love to hear, what's on your karaoke jam playlist? What's in heavy rotation?
Love the Stevie Nicks. I think it's hard not to love Stevie Nicks. I love that I am talking about Stevie Nicks. I feel the need to fluff up my hair and channel that Stevie Nicks. So do love the Stevie Nicks, but also Four Non-Blondes and some Dusty Springfield. And I'd say those are my go-tos. But increasingly, it's also, and by increasingly I mean in my car, it's also become a lot of Led Zeppelin. So there is room for drama in front of the microphone.
The car is where you practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering. This is just a thought that came to me.
A Jetta has great acoustics. They really need to sell on that.
I'm wondering how cynicism, skepticism, and confidence kind of play into that ability to just sort of like do karaoke. Don't you hear a lot of people being like, I could never do that. I have to be wasted, that kind of thing. And I'm thinking,
that is such. Oh, I love
I'm like
that.
seeing a thread here, and I'm wondering
Let's
if we have time
unpack
to
that.
tease
Yeah,
it
let's
apart.
unpack that. And I hope we get some more questions about that because I think that's such a fascinating topic. Well, if you think about it, like karaoke, it's this opportunity to create an authentic experience with an audience of saying, I'm going to deliver for you entertainment, a good time, maybe get you out of your seat and dancing, at least depending on whatever conference we're at, and that it's not going to sound horrible, or if it is, you're going to know the words so you can sing over it. So we have that kind of contract with the audience, and you need the audience's confidence in you. You also need to have confidence to deliver, and I think it does go back to, can you feel empowered? Do you know the words? Can you feel confident standing up there saying, I have enough information, maybe about the lyrics or the key that it was written in, to do a good job? Also, I'm confident that I know the audience in front of me, or at least I know enough that they're going to be supportive. And if I do a bad job, it's probably only like 2.5 minutes anyhow. And that's such a fascinating way to look at it, because it does go back to, can we create an experience in which everybody gets out of it what they want and what they expect? Can we deliver on those expectations? Because I think that delivery to expectation, that is the ultimate form of authenticity. And being consistent with those expectations, that's the ultimate form of authenticity. And so many brands, if they're kind of shooting all around, they miss out on that. If they're trying too many different voices, too many different styles, too many different visual languages across too many different platforms, because it's difficult to support too many different platforms, then they can't possibly hope for consistency. So they can't possibly hope and deliver on authenticity. I think, does that answer your question?
It starts to. I feel like we could talk about this for a really long time, but I really want the watchers, the viewers, to have a chance to ask their questions. So before we go to that, I'm wondering if I missed anything. Anything you want to talk about a little bit more? Anything I didn't ask a question about? Now's the time.
Well, I think the big point that I want to get across is that the issues around trust and cynicism, they may not have started in our industry. They may not have started in whatever industry in which you work. But they affect all industries and all parts of society across all regions, all countries now. So it is our problem. And while I don't think that designers are uniquely positioned to address this issue, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't. Especially through the choices that we make when we are creating the experiences that become the fabric of everyday life for so many people, in the interfaces with which they interact, in the publications they read, in the websites that they use to get government services, or to buy products, to share information. The stuff that we all use in everyday life, those need to be systems and platforms that we can trust. And if we have the opportunity to bring that back a little bit, to bring society back from that state of cynicism into one that's more a state of informed, confident trust, with a commitment and enthusiasm around ongoing education, of saying, yeah, I know what I know, but I'm confident in that knowledge, and it means that I can open myself up to new information and keep learning. When we can position our brands to share themselves better by communicating in a more vulnerable way, speaking in the first person, kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit to say, this is how we make our product. These are, where we have some problems maybe, or this is where we're still working out the kinks. Tell us what you think. When we can bring our brands more to that kind of place, I think it makes for a better, broader experience for the products that we make, but also for society in general. And that is exactly the work that we all need to be doing. And that's all the work that we can be doing too.
Seems like people really love the conversation about America's Test Kitchen. Do you have anything else about your work that you've done with them that you'd like to share?
Well, I guess is to kind of pull back on that curtain a little bit. Something that I found really interesting when I sat down with them is that the people that are the content creators and editors there are, by and large, the people that are also the test cooks and the people in the kitchen that are testing out like the 30 different ways to make ratatouille or to make a stew or to figure out the best way to brown beef on their 20 different pans that they're testing out that day. And the level of commitment around that, I think, is really interesting. We talk about the value of designing with and from diverse teams, that we should not be making anything about us without us when we are diversifying our teams. And I think that plays out in a really interesting way at America's Test Kitchen. They've got their test chefs, to just look at one small attribute. They range wildly in height, because what's going to work well for somebody that is 6'2" and leaning over a counter isn't going to work as well for maybe a woman that's 5'2", or somebody that has smaller hands versus larger hands. So they're testing on all of those different types of parameters to be able to create a more valuable and relevant aggregate response in their recommendations. Their recommendations have more value because people have learned to trust the team that is creating them. And also, I think because they see things like the vulnerability of the organization. So the commitment that they've made to showing how things work there when they're taking you behind the scenes, or maybe you're seeing like an image on Twitter or whatever that's like, well, something just exploded in the kitchen. Let's see it looking all messy right now. When they're showing you that side of the organization, it really does help to build trust in it. And then when they offer content types like revisiting their old recommendations and saying, that was accurate based on the information we had then. We recommended this as being the best knife sharpener at the time a few years ago because we tested the available models, but you know what? There was a recall, or you know what? Now there are 5 other models out now, and who knew that some are more cutting edge than others. But because of that, because they're willing to say, no, we're going to revisit what we previously said and see, does it still stack up, or do we want to change our minds on that? That also creates a space for their audience then to say, you know what, I have strong opinions that are loosely held, and that was the knife sharpener or the mixer or whatever around which I based my life. But now there's new information, and I am a confident enough home chef, I'm a confident enough individual that I can have that freedom to change my mind, which is an increasingly rare thing, it seems. But I think that kind of commitment and investment in their people, in designing the team that produces that information, and then in the quality of the content itself, that's what allows them to be a trustworthy brand for so many people. And I see there's another question there. How much is too much vulnerability? I think that's something that goes back to asking, well, what are we revealing about ourselves? And do we, as a brand, when you're revealing things about the inner workings, do you like it? Do you feel like you're revealing things that are maybe more sordid or more troublesome? I think for many brands, it's an opportunity to say, we need to fix that about our culture. If we're showing all of the people that work here and it's just a sea of pale white faces, if we've never noticed that before, we need to start noticing it. Not because it makes for better visuals on the website, but because maybe that's affecting the volume of ideas and the variety of ideas that we're bringing into our process. So I think that vulnerability can sometimes reveal painful truths about organizations, but it's also an opportunity to say, we learned this and we're working on it. And I think like Kickstarter is a great example of that. I think Kickstarter has really changed the way we communicate in terms of operational and organizational vulnerability. Because again, it used to be that everyone wanted to seem more polished and more like they've figured it out than maybe they had. And Kickstarter is the place now instead where brands are speaking in the first person and saying, hey, everybody, here's where we are today. You know what? Production was slowed down because we're working with maybe a new type of metal composite, and we didn't realize what would happen when we exposed it to a certain chemical or to high levels of heat, and we need to figure that out again. That's the type of conversation that I don't think we would have heard 20 years ago. That's the kind of information that would only come out maybe in a big scandal or maybe a big safety issue. But now brands see the opportunity in revealing those mistakes and missteps, those parts where they're still learning and still evolving. And it's an opportunity to say to their customers or prospective customers, we don't have it quite right yet, but here's where we are. Here's our approach for getting better. And what they've realized, what many organizations have realized in Kickstarter, is that that type of communication endears them to their audience. It helps build loyalty so that prospective customers move from customers to advocates. When you're a part of that learning process because of how the brand is speaking to you and the level of information that it's revealing, you can defend it a little bit better, both to yourself to say, yeah, I am still on board with buying that fidget cube or buying that camera bag. They just need a little more time. You can defend it to yourself and to your friends. And that's what can help build advocacy and what builds empires.
Nice. That's super super important to be able to justify purchases.
Yes. Yeah.
I think we probably have time for one more question. You mentioned in a couple answers ago that I didn't get a chance to follow up on, but how America's Test Kitchen kind of tests among a bunch of different people with different ranges of abilities and different physical characteristics. And I'm wondering what your perspective is on the obvious tie-in to accessibility and designing software that works for everybody.
I think that, so I don't have a lot of experience to be able to talk eloquently about this, but I think that the opportunity to bring a broader variety of users into the role, I guess it's kind of like what we were just talking about with moving from customer to advocate, when we can bring representatives of our audience from the position of user into the role of designer, when we can diversify our design teams, then we can avoid the issues of hand dryers that don't recognize African Americans, or issues where people are trying to reach things or see things, but it was designed for someone much taller. Or, when I'm trying to read information on packaging and it was designed for somebody with perfect vision. Most issues of accessibility, when we fix them for people that are not representative of the largest chunk of our users, but are still part of our users, when we fix them for everyone, then it's better for everyone as well. And I don't know why we wouldn't want to do that. I think as designers, as brands and business owners.
Very good. I think this is our time. And I want to thank Margot for answering all my questions, as ridiculous as they may have been.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun. I appreciate it.
Great. If you haven't checked out her earlier book, Content Strategy at Work, you should. I believe at Adobe we have a copy in our Content Strategy library. And stick around for Designing for Trust with Plugins and Voice. And that does it for us. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.